How is it possible to consider someone for marriage if they don't know how to cook, if they don't know how to fix something in their house, if they don't know how to fix something in their car, if they're basically relying on their mom to feed them? But if tomorrow there's a social collapse, there's a huge crisis, these guys are dead.
They will die first. When people are specifically looking for marriage, they're not thinking this is going to be the father of my children.
If a man can't control his anger, if he's used to mummy picking up the pieces and she's not there to do that anymore, how do you think that's going to bode?
Hello and welcome. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm here with you, Uzair. You are dad of two young kids, a boy and a girl. You have a degree in political science. You, Javeria, you have studied South Asian history. You work in higher education. So my main contention is that Western culture has contaminated a lot of people to the point where it has been kind of a sunnah to aspire to materialism, get as rich as possible, get houses at any cost, even if it means doing illegal things, even if it means sacrificing our faith, our morals, our ethics, our culture, our identity. The discussions comes from a place of love because we all want to be better people. We want the future generations to be better people. Also, we're not into generalizing, meaning that we don't believe that whole groups are intrinsically good or bad. We are all the products of our society, our upbringing, cultural influences, and more. And because the culture bombards us with all these different elements, and the key is to be able to make the difference and to select what is good and reject what is bad. So let's get started. Uzair, first of all, what would you say are your contentions with how among Muslim here in the UK masculinity is propagated? What are your contentions?
I mean, I think firstly what you touched on, first of all, there's been, a rise in sort of what we call the bro culture. There's some brothers out there who are very practicing, but they also have this very hyper masculine worldview, which is centered around, the gym, bodybuilding. Not that there's nothing wrong with that, but it's about how that feeds into the worldview. Very forthright views on polygamy, to the extent where obviously there is an Islamic tradition of that, but where it becomes indistinguishable perhaps from having multiple partners or girlfriends. And I suppose it's the way they talk about women. And I think, this has been a recent thing. I mean, like you said, I think a lot of people are being influenced to some degree by things that they've seen, obviously in mass media and so forth. But I also think they're perhaps reacting or feeling threatened by the rise of I wouldn't say feminism, because feminism has been around for decades, but I suppose about these ideas becoming more prominent within our own community. I think some brothers have felt very threatened by this. There's also these blurring of lines with the culture as well. So for example, you have your traditional expectations as a South Asian male about your obligations to your family, to your parents, about being the breadwinner. There's a lot of sort of pressures with that. But then, some Muslim males are finding that when they're getting married, their partners are perhaps expecting them to do that, but then also help around the house. And they feel like they haven't got, I'm not condoning any of this, by the way, it's just, but they haven't got the authority that went along with being the breadwinner. And a lot of people are perhaps feeling threatened by that. And I think some of it is a reaction to that. Even I would say, a lot of Muslim females rebelling against certain South Asian male norms, sometimes it's coming from a place of trauma. If their dads misused that, there's an Islamic thing of the dad being the head of the household. Now, if someone has misused that and someone is then reacting against that, again, that's coming from a place of trauma. I think thirdly, over the last 20 or 30 years, with the second or third generation Muslims, there's been a lot of anti-war activism. There's been a lot of activism about racism, a lot of awareness about structural racism. And obviously, a lot of this stuff comes from a place of trauma. in these battles that people have been having, whether it's foreign policy, whether it's race, often it's been against right-wing elements. And a lot of people have aligned themselves to left-wing political movements. Now, left-wing is, as I've discussed, is a big term, and people use it lazily. You can be a socialist, have a left-wing economic platform, but you can be socially conservative, right? But what I'm talking about specifically is social liberalism, right? So a lot of people have aligned themselves with such movements and agendas. Obviously there's a lot of discussion these days about LGBT issues, a lot of discussions about gender norms. People, there's been a lot of discussion about deconstructing these gender roles, and some people have voiced concerns that by aligning with certain groups from an Islamic perspective, we're perhaps going too far in a certain direction. We need to maintain. Some people have talked about maintaining balance, but some people feel that we're going too far. And then now these things are starting to impact our view of what a Muslim male should be. And some of it is a reaction to that.
Do you also think that there is a dilution in traditional values, traditional gender roles, in the sense that we are seeing, some people argue that men are getting feminized.
Again, with that, there's different phenomenon going on, right? So I think I can speak as a South Asian immigrant that when you're a first generation immigrant, you're in a new country, you're very conscious that you do not want your children to lose their cultural values. You're confused, it's a different world. And I think a lot of South Asian mothers in the past, especially if you've grown up in an area where there's not much family around, have kept men inside, have kept young boys inside to protect them from so-called bad influences. And that's led to them developing less skills of independence, being quite dependent on their parents. And in a way, that's also had an impact on, in a way, feminizing, if you want to use that term, men. So, for example, whereas traditionally they might have played in the street, or they might have made friends, they might have developed confidence, or they might have, undertaken outdoor activities, that hasn't happened. Similarly, because of a lot of South Asians being from working class backgrounds, and a lot of people having lots of economic difficulties, parents haven't invested sufficient time or spent sufficient time with their parents, so you find a lot of children have just grown up inside. And I suppose these days, using devices in front of a screen, and you are then finding, a generation of people. But I think it's important that one should know how to defend themselves at least. And obviously, you find some people who don't know how to do that, who don't have an awareness of that. There's certain, I think, things that were historically associated with men, like chivalry. Islam is very specific about gender roles. We need to be clear about this. Islam, Islam has fixed notions. They're not constraining, but they are there and they are to be adhered to. And people feel because that has sort of withered away, it's leading to lots of problems in the community. So, for example, when it comes to marriage, so people choosing marriage partners, whereas traditionally the father and of course the mother, would have had a role in this. We've all become influenced by social liberalism to a degree and individualism.
I think what this loss of manhood feeling leads to is a big fragility amongst men as well, where people become not only reactive, but they become extremely sensitive to any mention of justice for women. So then even a reasonable demand or a reasonable claim against men, you get washed with the brush of you're radical feminist, when actually what you're saying might not be that. But I think it breeds a kind of sensitivity and fragility in men, where it's actually, from a woman's perspective, it can look a bit pathetic. Why are men, a part of being a man is also to be balanced. Why is a man not able to sit in balance and harmony and have a discussion about something? I think it's trauma, like you said. When I see men reacting in such hurt and extreme ways about the loss of manhood, I feel sorry for them. The second thing I wanted to say is I find it interesting that the reference point for manhood has become so polluted by our society that actually people forget that the reference for humankind is the Prophet ﷺ, but the but also for men, is the prophetic masculinity. And there seems to be not an understanding of what a balanced man is.
Yeah.
Why, when we talk about gender in Islam, is it that man earns money, woman stays at home and looks after the kids? I have no issue with that, brother. Why is there no discussion about how was the Prophet ﷺ caring? How did he speak to people?
Yeah.
How do you control anger as a man? How do you defend yourself? I would be really interested to hear more discussions about how the Prophet ﷺ problem solved, how he advised people, how he, when he was displeased with something, how he dealt with that. I don't know where those discussions are. As a woman, how do you be balanced? Like, I just feel like, why is gender only discussed in such basic ways?
Yeah,
I find
that's
it
right.
very disturbing, actually.
It's very, yeah.
And I'm like, but surely, Uzair, there's more to being a man than earning money. The way Muslims talk about manhood is very reductive.
It is.
To be a man, and this is one thing I learned from reading Bell Hooks, sometimes for women it's hard to see a man in pain, because even we have internalized patriarchy to such a degree where we can't accept that you're in pain. I had this even with Will, where I had to tell myself Will is not just a provider, he's a human being with a full set of emotions. I actually feel like this constant narrative about rights and responsibilities adds to the problem as well.
Yeah, I would agree.
You as a man are more than earning money for your kids.
I think what's started to happen is this weird sort of hybrid of South Asian culture, bits of it meets Western liberalism, or like you said, the Red Pill movement and various things, and they've just mutated to create this monster. So, I know of situations, I'm going to give an example, with some sisters who are like, it is your responsibility as a man to provide, and you must do that. Okay, fair enough. But, it is just my responsibility just to look after the children. That is it. But it's sort of, you're taking Islamic responsibilities, but then you're also combining them with Western, sort of, your notions of what Western feminism are. So, for example, I've seen examples when then the male says, okay, I will be the provider if you want to have that set up, but then I expect you to do this. No, I'm not going to do that because, that's backward and we've been oppressed and I'm not going to do that. Well, then in a sense, what you're doing is you are creating this bizarre hybrid of Islam and feminism. And I've seen brothers do it on the other side as well. I'm not just sort of taking shot at women here, and I think that just, and I think that's when people start losing the balance. There is, like you said, a prophetic example of all of this. And there is, like and in the prophetic example, there is flexibility, on both sides, not just on one side, on both sides.
How would you define feminism? Who's there first?
It's a term people use in a lazy way. There's different traditions in feminism. I think there's broadly the first variant, which emerged in the 50s, which one would call liberal feminism, right? Which was more of a struggle for maybe equal pay, certain political rights, representation. Then you got the second wave, which is the more radical wave in the 1970s, which was, truly radical in the sense that you had people talking about, that motherhood is a form of patriarchy. And then you also have the Marxist feminism as well, which again is a spectrum as well. So what I'm basically saying is feminism is a wide-ranging ideology, and people just band it around lazily. And I think there's a lot of sisters that use it lazily. There's also a lot of brothers that use it lazily as well. It doesn't mean if a woman mentions feminism that she's a radical feminist, should be using separatism, the biological means should be taken away. But there's also sisters who do not understand what feminism means and just band the word around. People need to I'm not patronizing, when people need to read up on what feminism is and the different currents.
In your understanding, what would be your definition?
My understanding of feminism in its broadest possible sense, and you're asking me to do like a textbook definition on the spot, would be a general movement or worldview which seeks to redress historical injustices against females.
My one is like much more basic than that, and you might disagree with it, which is any kind of unjust domination on women to be eradicated and for there to be a notion of fairness between the sexes. That's how I would define it. But then what do we mean by unjust domination? I mean, we could...
Is that your personal definition?
That's my personal definition. That's how I always think of it.
Okay.
So, for instance...
Because, you know, when you talk about fairness of the sexes, well, like I said, there are some radical feminists who believe in matriarchy, not patriarchy. I ever come across those concepts.
So when I say, like, again, my definition's, like, you studied politics and I didn't, right? My definition probably needs more specificity. So what does unjust domination mean? What does fairness between the sexes mean? What I mean is... Maybe my definition is just a lot more basic and I haven't given it much thought. But I often think about it as having justice for women and for there to be not a toxic and abusive domination of men over women.
Islam, which we know historically has made it so women daughters stopped being buried in the times of Jahiliyyah. It made it possible for women to be scholars, to acquire knowledge. We've heard among the female companions of the Prophet, women like traveling, women fighting, and like Khadija, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, was a very successful businesswoman. So don't you think maybe all because we don't agree on definitions, people are in fact just trying to say the same things but don't know how to articulate it?
Potentially.
Like the layperson doesn't know how to articulate it.
I think some people who take that very basic approach to it, they do not understand at times is that, yes, Islam gives men and women different rights. You've spoken about some of the rights that women acquired under Islam, but Islam has different roles and responsibilities. And I think what is the slippery slope is sometimes some people start to interpret those different roles and responsibilities as being in opposition to that equality they're trying to strive for.
Some of the brothers who are fiercely against feminism argue also that, for example, toxic masculinity doesn't exist. What do you make of that?
Oh, I think that's nonsense. Toxic masculinity does exist.
How would you define it?
I think toxic masculinity is a masculinity which bases its very existence on the notion of dominating and exploiting people and aspiring to things which are so far from the prophetic masculinity that they've become a perversion. That's how I think of it. So a man who is obsessed with having the most, being the best, having the most muscles, having the most women, the basic way, the basic mode that person is in is about acquisition to basically make yourself feel better as a man and to make yourself look good. It's all about externalities and optics. And to me, that is the opposition of what prophetic masculinity is.
That very much sounds like neoliberalism / capitalism / supremacy.
Can I add something to that? I mean, I think that's part of it, and I think that's a very modern phenomenon. I think people would interpret, the pre-neoliberal era, if you look at that, how, men used to behave in the 40s or the 30s. You would see elements of toxic masculinity there as well. It's about taking the masculine traits. We talked about earlier about being able to, for example, defend yourself or being the head of a household or those sort of things and sort of putting them on steroids. And it's about power, it's about control. A classic example in the South Asian context would be if someone is married and they are having disagreements with their wife, sometimes the mother-in-law or the father-in-law might say, be a man and exert yourself and put her in a place. And we've had those sort of things in our culture, and that for me is toxic masculinity.
I want to point out, just before we proceed with the conversation, I want to point out one very crucial point that we haven't mentioned, which is patriarchy doesn't have a culture and patriarchy doesn't have a gender. Patriarchy can be perpetuated by any culture and any gender.
Absolutely.
But men benefit from patriarchy and women don't.
The sort of example I cited earlier, that it's your responsibility as a Muslim male to provide for me. I need this Gucci handbag, this holiday, is your duty to provide this. My responsibility is to take care of the children. And if you see that colliding, so Islam neoliberalism and all that colliding. You know, I need these holidays this many times a year. I need this handbag. It is your duty as a Muslim man to provide this for me. And I can see examples where the man is trapped in it. You know, he needs to prove that he has money. Think of the pressure on men sometimes to live up to this. Imagine having a wife who's demanding this and saying, you know, this is your Islamic duty to do this.
But what I would say is that woman is enacting spiritual abuse. To exploit a man to that extent. You know, you're also told to live within the means of what you have. And the person is therefore is exceeding their limit. And that's not fair. But my point is that English culture, American culture, Polish culture, Pakistani, any culture in the world, every culture has patriarchy. It just looks different.
Yeah, absolutely.
So British culture has patriarchy.
Of course it does.
But it rears its head in different ways. South Asian culture has it, but it has a cultural articulation and specificity. And I'm saying that men and women can both perpetuate patriarchy. Men benefit from it more on the whole, but there are times where women can use patriarchy and weaponize it against men as well.
They can.
Okay? Now, I think that's a really clear point to make before we proceed.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
That's that I wasn't expecting to reach that point in the conversation so early, because we've come to the conclusion of what Bell Hooks has observed, as you said, that patriarchy has no gender and it can be enacted by both genders. And what also here is a lot of materialism in this discussion, a lot of emphasis on the appearances. It's not as much a gender problem as it is a problem with modernity, with as a culture of division and atomization and individualization, a problem with capitalism, greed, the accumulation of riches and material possessions, and neoliberalism. This is why she calls it this patriarchy, white supremacist, capitalism. It's an ecosystem that works together, where the core idea at the base, at the roots of it, is domination. Is this very anti-Islamic idea of human being is above like everything else. Whether you're a man or a woman, you are better than whatever and whoever is different than you. And then because of your ego believes it, and people become, I would say, to some extent, their own gods. This is a form of shirk, I would say. People go and perpetuate oppression on whatever they think is inferior, whether it's the other gender, whether it's nature, the natural environment, whether it is people from different ethnicities, and so on and so on. So yeah, this concept of high value man, which is defined by material possessions, and we hear so many people now on social media, these either relationship coaches, pickup artists, or these guys promoting get rich quick schemes, that yeah, if you want to be successful, you need to go to the gym, get rich, get as many women as you like. And we've got Muslim versions of this. So yeah, you can have 4 wives at the same time, but yeah, you can marry as many times as you like. Just ditch one of them, and if you want to change and you get bored, and so on. And people sell these things as escaping the matrix. This which I find really weird, because don't you find this a bit paradoxical? These are people who sell liberation, but tell you that liberation is changing your appearance, possessing as much as you can, get as much women as you like.
I think it's liberation from your banal existence of being a fat, overweight, broke person that no one wants to marry. And you know, and I think we have to call it out here, right? I think if you're either gender, you know, society, whether it's Muslims, South Asians, secular people, Europeans, no culture values an overweight, broke person.
It's true.
And you know, even if you go before this red pill movement or anything, if you just look at the South Asian Rishta system or whatever, you know, people, you know, how much do you earn? What do you look like? You know, do you have a house? Can you support my daughter? And, you know, it's creating a big fitna in the community.
But also it creates this idea, and it's interesting to me that Muslims perpetuate this idea, because our liberation doesn't fundamentally lie in the dunya. It lies with Allah when we are with God. You know, we're here, and we're supposed to refine ourselves and return back to our fitra state, so when we die, we're the cleanest version of ourselves when we return to Allah. That's the point of being here, right? And to be stewards on this earth and to take care of people and to worship Allah, right? But why do people think that you're going to gain some kind of, I don't know, this incredible liberation by changing how you look and getting rich? It's not. But this is antithetical to what Islam teaches. And actually, Islam came at a time to rectify many of these Jahil viewpoints, which the Jahil Arabs had at that time, Uzair. You know, there were rich women who used to wear long abayas and they would drag them on their floor to show wealth. You know, these were people who used to bury their daughters and literally worship idols. Like, I'm thinking to myself, like, the same Jahiliyyah it just takes a different form, is it?
I'm just trying to think of perhaps how these people would justify it, and obviously I agree with what you're saying, but I think perhaps, you know, I once met many years ago someone outside a mosque, and he said to me, you know what, yeah, Islam is the religion which understands human nature, and this is why he has, you know, Allah has allowed men to have 4 wives, because he understands human nature, he understands the male's nature. I think perhaps what they're trying to get at is, if you're at one with your nature, with your fitrah, then, you know, you will seek, maybe get a form of liberation.
So many people fall into this narrative, but what we see on Instagram is people end being clones of each other. You showed me this Instagram account of this person you met in high school, and he's got that perfect lifestyle where, you know, white BMW, the wife has a Fiat 500.
They've done better than that, Will.
They go like it's about going to the gym. The woman looks like a top model, and their house is entirely grey. They have this like traditional Instagram picture with Eid balloons, and they go on holiday to Dubai, and end of the story.
Oh, you missed some crucial parts. Number one, it's not a Fiat 500. It's a Mercedes AMG convertible for the wife with a personalised number plate. He drives a SUV crossover Lamborghini. There's 3 or 4 trips to Dubai. You know, whatever they're doing. But what's really interesting is that the child, you know, if it's Ramadan, you know, there will be a full cardboard cutout of a mosque and like personalised prayer mats, and obviously lots of companies are getting mentions, and like everything becomes an event. Like every Islamic thing becomes an event, and there's props
and they don't have even like that many followers or engagement. So it's like, you know, they basically live their lives, but for the eyes of others. And while, you know, they maybe, I don't know if they think this is what is liberation look like, but don't you find paradoxical that people end up just being copies of each other? Yeah,
I mean, they all have the same cars. The kids wear the same Fendi clothes with the fake Fendi. It might be a real Fendi hijab or a Louis Vuitton. I'm not. You know.
I believe it's AliExpress.com.
It could be. You know, the same clothes, the same holidays. Yeah, it's all the same. You know, they're not going to go to Iceland for like an amazing adventure, are they? They're going to go to certain few countries. Let's be honest. Yeah. Well, no one's going to go to Tokyo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, and the sad thing is like, I just actually wonder, Will, what are these people's personalities actually like? Like, imagine all you have is your grey house and your cars and your trips to Dubai. What else is there? Like, it must be a very sad existence. It must be boring. But maybe people love it. I mean, I don't understand how that could be interesting. I mean, you tell me.
I think some of it might come from, if you're talking about that certain lifestyle, it might come from a place of trauma.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of South Asians, you know, some of these people who I've come across who do this sort of things, I know they're from humble backgrounds. You know, they grew up in a terraced house somewhere. Dad had a working class job, large family.
Mum was at home.
Probably the only holiday was to Pakistan on PIA. Dinner out was Dixie Chicken or Chicken Cottage. This was their lives. And this is all sort of new. This is all new to them. And, you know, a lot of people, I'm not judging anyone, you know, a lot of people may have grown up with a cultural form of Islam. So it's like this new religious zeal with this new wealth.
But it also echoes kind of like what the working class person from Romford is doing in Essex, the nouveau riche kind of like grey house. I've suddenly got, like, my dad's got a successful business because he's a builder, and my mum's owns a salon. you know, and now we have a 5-bedroom house in Romford and we have a grey house and Lamborghinis. Like, to me, to be honest, like, these Muslims are pretty much just echoing that with a bit of a Muslim spin. It's not really that different.
It's just a Muslim spin.
It's just not very different from what the wider population is doing, Will. You can go to any part of London and the UK and find non-Muslims doing the same thing. Sorry.
Yeah, one contention I have is that don't you think that it creates a risk for people to, just because they to fit in, to conform to these standards despite what they really aspire to in life? Because if I reflect on my own experiences being rejected for marriage or from jobs in the Muslim community because I wasn't ticking these very boxes, at some point, you know, when I saw that the people they were hiring instead of me were these like typical brothers with a laser trim beard, loud and arrogant, not caring about religion, just about their white BMW, you know, it made me doubt at some point if I was like a valid kind of Muslim, because I got rejected because I was praying 5 times a day. I had a beard, not even as long as today, but for some people it was just too much. So I was wondering if maybe I should, you know, have become like a GP or a banker, got in these cars on loans, and just started not to care about religion, because it when you see that these profiles are getting validated and are getting the jobs while you are in a situation of survival, it just messes a bit with your mind. And I don't know if you're familiar with you know, normative pressure in social psychology, like, you know, the Milgram experiment, or what Solomon Asch, the experiment with the lines, where in a room there was 3 lines of different lengths and one line which was corresponding to one of them. And the experiment was to place a subject between 2 other people and discuss what is the length of the line. And so the differences were obvious, but 2 of the people who were complicit in the experiment would on purpose insist that no, the line is the same length as the longest one or the shortest one, and the subject would just, how do you say, he would give in, this is what you say, and he would then give the answer, the wrong answer, because he believed in this experiment shows that if a majority of people around you think something or do something, it's a human instinct to believe that if the majority does it, they must be right. And even if I think something else, they are wrong. And we've seen this in our families, among our friends, people who have, like, people would call nerdy interest, but try to hide them and just, you know, do things like hanging out in the shisha cafe, going to the gym and stuff, because everyone does it.
I agree.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, I think this exists everywhere, right?
It's not just Muslims.
It's not just Muslims, and it's types of Muslims, right? Like, you know, the activist, you know, so, you know, critical thinking Muslims out there who all went to SOAS, I'm sure they all have their sort of own social norms and codes. And, you know, if anyone there does something which is out of the norm in their social circle, I'm sure they would be treated very much the same way.
Yeah.
You know, if someone said, I don't know who Frantz Fanon is, no one would associate with them.
Yeah, you'd be people. Basically, if you said, I don't like decoloniality, you're an idiot.
You're out of it.
So it's like every group has its codes that you have to adhere to be a part of it.
Part of it.
And in a way, Will, I think because the broader society, I didn't really fit into a lot of these codes. I think my loud extroversion is a made-up category. I think that has been very much rewarded in my life. But being dark-skinned, being slightly overweight, not being the most attractive, I always felt... And also, like, not having the same interests necessarily as others was not rewarded. But I found a bit of a home at SOAS for it. You can be a bit of an oddball and a misfit and no one really minds.
But to an extent.
There's also limitations. So you can be an oddball and a misfit, but if you think anything outside of a very left or radical left way, people think you're crazy. You're not necessarily going to get the same nonsense as you would about your weight and the way you look in that space.
Another question, which is based on my experience, in the process of finding someone for marriage, I got rejected because the person said she wanted a strong man in the family. She was referring to her brother-in-law, who is an arms dealer in prison, who got caught after he got married, and like for a super long sentence, and now is raising his kid like from prison. It sounded like a caricature, but it echoes lots of experiences I had, and I just wonder, why is there this conception that a strong man is someone who does these risky stuff, almost careless, and very often illegal, and like what is it about?
I think it's the version of masculinity that you do also see like films and media perpetuating, Will. Like the kind of man who's the action hero, the man who's in control, the man who's the protector. These are things that women are picking up, and men are also picking up from wider phenomena that are going on in terms of media, film, ideas discussed between friends, what they see to be aspirational, and people pick these up and form these into what they think should be the ideal man. Again, there's no consideration of the fact that a man that can control his anger and think calmly and carefully and strategically and be balanced, why that is not considered to be healthy masculine qualities. But for me, that's what I actually think they are. And I think a lot of women are also not really are being raised by fathers who are definitely very far from what is a healthy masculinity. And then you're then getting all this information from society, from things you see, from your friends, and then you kind of piece together, like, if your brother's an arms dealer, Will, who knows what your dad was doing? My dad and brother are not like that. Why would that be a conception of masculinity for me? What do you think? You've studied family systems theory. You've studied...
Yeah.
You tell me, is that...
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Same person, the same person we talked about who is in prison, he also was this kind of guy who would wait for his mom or his wife to cook for him roti salan. Didn't know how to change a light bulb. I'm not joking. So many people like that who, they can boast with their supercar, their wealth, like expensive holidays. But when it comes to proper life skills, I just don't know where they are there. How can this kind of person be considered as a strong man?
We've talked about this before, haven't we? About how many guys don't actually have skills in terms of DIY, like those, or not even just DIY. They can't cook, they can't do DIY, they can't look after the house. And me and you have spoken about this.
I think touched on this right at the beginning.
Yeah.
The sort of reasons why that might happen, but yeah, that is a phenomenon that's quite widespread, unfortunately.
But some women don't see those things as being indicative of things that a man needs to have. There's this very simplified view of what a man should be from some women, and men that you should essentially have loads of money and be hyper masculine, extroverted.
How is it possible to consider someone for marriage if they don't know how to cook, if they don't know how to fix something in their house, if they don't know how to fix something in their car, if they don't know how... if they're basically relying on their mom to feed them, how?
I have an answer, Will, from their perspective. They got money, they will pay for someone to fix it. They will pay for someone to fix their car. They will pay for someone to...
They'll order food.
They'll order takeaways. They'll go to Nando's 5 times a week. They'll be happy.
I know it's a far-stretched scenario, but what if from one day to another, and men are supposed to provide for women and to protect them, this is the narrative, but if tomorrow there's a social collapse, there's a huge crisis, these guys are dead.
They will die first.
Yeah.
They will literally die first. Yeah.
What the hell?
They'll get eaten by zombies.
If they've done enough bench presses, it might, if they can, their arms might be bigger than the rest of their body. It might have the men with the big biceps.
But Will, I don't think people think in very complex ways. They literally just think strong, extroverted man, protection, money. It's so basic, Will. There's no other thinking.
No.
And some men, I think that that's what women want, and it feeds the perpetual cycle of, I'm going to give women what they want, women are wanting it, and then everyone's stuck in that horrible loop. Do you know what I mean? Like, some men think, oh, if I behave like that, I'll get women. It just never ends.
But my question then is, in your experiences, have you seen this working on the long term? Do these marriages last? Do these marriages are happy marriages? How are the kids that end up?
I mean, I think now we do have, unfortunately, in the community, higher rates of divorce than we did historically. And some people would say it's because people are no longer, I mean, I know you've had these conversations, that perhaps it's because women of your generation, are not willing to put up with abuse like people did in the past. Some people say that's the only phenomenon. I would say, yeah, that's probably right to a degree, but also actually because people are now giving greater emphasis to these things than before. And then after a 2-year honeymoon period, where you've worn these things out, like you said, how many holidays can you do to Dubai? And when you have children, and sometimes money can't solve everything. Like you said, if a man can't control his anger, if he's used to mummy picking up the pieces and she's not there to do that anymore, and his wife's not willing to entertain that, it then inevitably leads to problems. Because do you think an extroverted male who's hypermasculine, aggressive, and has had lots of partners in the past, an ego, so how do you think that's going to bode in terms of being faithful, in terms of
conflict resolution,
patience with children, everything? How do you think that's going to bode? Probably not well.
But what I'm saying is that the overemphasis on those things, like you said, after 2 years, that's going to wear off. And then you're left with that horrible character of your husband.
You are.
Who's screaming and shouting, what if his parents pass away and he can't do a thing in the house? I don't know. What if he gets made redundant and he can't pay someone to clean the house? I've seen a lot of examples of very horrible marriages, and a lot of men who definitely do not possess qualities of patience, strategic thinking, good decision making, observing the sunnah, caring about religion. I've definitely seen those things as well. Yeah. And I've also seen women behave in ways which are really, really inappropriate in the marriage as well. I'm not just going to say it's men. When people are specifically looking for marriage, they're not thinking this is going to be the father of my children. This man who is obsessed with money and is obsessed with his massive muscles and cars, and is really angry or hypermasculine and a bit materialistic, he's going to pass on all of that stuff to your kids. And you really need to think carefully about why you're choosing these men. And, if a woman is similarly displaying toxic qualities like that, men need to be thinking very carefully, am I just marrying a supermodel who can't think critically and is rude all the time? That's also not a reasonable partner to pick.
Uzair, you told me about the story while your parents, especially your mom, encouraged you to go to the mosque and to learn Quran and so on as a kid, you had Muslim kids bullying you for going to the mosque.
Yeah. I think your experience, if you grew up in an area which is predominantly Muslim, it's a different experience. If you grew up in an area where it's not very Muslim and there's very few Muslims in school, I think there are some children, fortunately, to fit in, they will then sort of ally themselves with other non-Muslims then, and they will actually even just pick on they will pick on Muslims just to fit in. And it's really bizarre because then these same children will then go to Tarawih and they'll go to pray Jummah. But they would just pick on other Muslims. It's shocking.
It's just in their bid to fit in, isn't it?
It's just literally just in their bid to fit in as much as they can. The real, if you look at it from an Islamic perspective, the real struggle in terms of your nafs, in terms of upholding your principles, is sort of when you're in the most direst situation or when it's the most pressing. The peer pressure at school is immense. And to be a practicing Muslim when you're 16, when everyone's going to parties, drinking, fornicating, is a very different ball game to then being a practicing Muslim when you're 40 or 35. And unfortunately, I'm not saying everyone's like this. You have people, they will just do whatever it takes to fit in. So if when it's 16, everyone's doing that, they'll do that. Then when they go to university, if everyone in the eye socks are Salafi, they will become a Salafi brother. And then they will start preaching and they'll become very strict in their views. And my point is, it's easy to do that when you're 30, 35, 40. You should, and then you're talking to other people, saying to other people, you're not following Islam, you're not doing this, etc. You take a very rigid stance. But you should have really done that when you were 16 or even 18. And this is one of the things I find the most frustrating.
To end this discussion, what, in your opinion, in our modern society, are key qualities and values for people to possess?
There is many references in the hadith, in Islamic scripture, about what expectations are. I think people need to be mindful of these, but also, like with everything, interpret them with moderation and follow the sunnah. But I think in terms of qualities, I think of course the ability to self-reflect, be critical, be patient,
being caring, being responsible, kind, reflective, thinking critically, being just, being patient. I think these qualities are things that balance human beings, and these are qualities which help to keep your ego in check, because the ego can sometimes make you want to do really angry things or lose your senses and act out all your desires. But part of being a Muslim is keeping yourself in control, and focusing your energies on doing what Allah has asked you to do. This is not just about our honeymoon period. This is about a person you're taking a very big risk marrying someone you're going to live with until the day that you die, unless that's not the kind of version of marriage you believe in. It's a version I believe in. And you have to be Khalifa and stewards of the earth together and take care of things and worship Allah.
I think it's a really good point that you mentioned Khilafah and control, because I don't know, Uzair, if you remember the Pirelli commercials from the 2000s, power is nothing without control. Do you remember these?
No.
It's fine. Because I argue, and this is the last point I would like you to reflect on, is I think we are in a society that puts too much emphasis on power, domination, competition, which are neoliberal standards, which means that on either side of the spectrum, whether we talk about like the roadman culture, whether we talk about the red pill movement, it's about domination. People are seeking power over the others. There's no middle way. While if we look at the traditional concept of khilafah, it's first of all about service, asking yourself, how can you develop and better yourself so you can be at the service of others, like protecting those who suffer, and be able to provide for those around you. And now we are in a society where paradoxically being at the service of others is seen as a weakness, is shameful. We hear things such as, compassion is weakness, forgiveness is cowardice, and this kind of values. So what do you think of that?
I think this is everywhere, unfortunately. This is not just... Our culture is traditionally quite collectivist in its approach.
And service-orientated.
And service-orientated, I think people often say that in South Asian culture, you live for other people and your relatives, not yourself. And that can be suffocating at times. But I think that's slowly dying out, unfortunately. Some of the positive aspects of that. People are becoming more individualized, not just even in this country, even in Pakistan. And we can look at globalization for that. But collective thought, collective ways of thinking are generally have been in decline. And it is unfortunately individualism.
I'd agree with that. And, from a spiritual perspective, to be in service of others is a part of defeating your own ego. And I would say it's a requirement. And, I have expressed my disappointment and frustration at some family and friends at how little they are willing to give of their time and resources to others. And I find it deeply sad. And I think that it adds to a kind of a depletion of community care. I think sitting on your own all the time and just doing things for yourself, you're creating an environment for really, really strange things to develop within yourself. It's not healthy. And I think it's very sad, and I think there's also a rise in mental health issues because these things are breaking down. I'm not saying, for instance, that community care is the only way to address mental health crises, but what I'm saying is that certainly a breakdown of care is a very concerning thing. But I think we see it, Uzair. We see it with the people around us. We see it with our friends. And it's really, really worrying, I think.
I really like the arc that this discussion has taken, because from this very specific question of gender roles, we have been able to explore and again find ourselves in a loop of this concept of meta-colonialism, where we are basically colonized by all these different systems, and we have uncovered from that very simple question like a massive network of roots, actually, where it's about, this dominator model. It is about the individualization, the atomization of society. So the problems people point out on the surface, the breaking down of the society, of the family, the erasure of family, of traditional values, and so on. It's not just a gender problem. It's not like men versus feminism or LGBTQ, or it is something much deeper, which actually historically has started since the industrial era. People would argue even by the time of the colonization, where people have started implementing this industrial domination over others, whether like people from different races, people from like the environment, and all in all, it is about I would say a shirk on global scale, where people have become their own gods, and because you believe that you can be solving your problem by yourself because you have all this power. People just don't rely on each other. People start wearing masks. And why do we have this mental health epidemic? Why do you have so many divorces, as we have discussed? Is because people are so obsessed by wearing a mask till the bitter end, till things are at a point of no return, and friendships are destroyed, marriages break, children's education is messed up, and people only wake up when it's too late and the damage is done. And for many reasons, either because we've seen they're traumatized, because of this peer pressure of fitting in, because of racism, because of this like narrative in Britain or the US that success is only attained through wealth, fame, influence, and so on. And people compromise so much on themselves that you cannot live a lie forever. Okay, so thank you so much for your time. I think it was really enriching. Again, don't subscribe. It's not a channel about gender roles or anything. So thank you so much for your attention, and take care of each other until next time. Okay, alhamdulillah.